Work. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, we are training on the exclusive right of sale listing agreement. And basically, this is the new listing agreement that was just released from the Florida Realtors that will cover everything new that has to do with the NAR settlement. So let's get into it. I want to know if you have any questions after this, you can put them in the comments. Make sure that you subscribe to my channel somewhere around here, and that way you can get alerted when there's new trainings on all these new forms. So make sure that you like, subscribe, and share this with your colleagues in case you feel that they need a little training as well. So let's go into it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we're going to go right into this exclusive right of listing agreement transaction broker. Now, if you are with La Rosa Realty, we all know that here in the state of Florida and La Rosa Realty, we are as a transaction broker. Basically, we can go ahead and represent both parties. So that is what a transaction broker is. And today we're going to talk about the exclusive right of sale listing agreement transaction broker. Now, there were about 5 different ones released. One is for single agent, one is for transaction broker, one is to transition to a transaction broker. You know, there's just 5 of them, 4 or 5 of them. So this is the one that we use with La Rosa Realty and also most of the agents here in the state of Florida. Of course, my disclosure is at the front of this video, so you will see that this is just for training purposes only. And obviously, we won't be held liable. Obviously, always consult an attorney if you have any specific legal questions, okay? So let's get into it. This is the exclusive right of sale listing agreement. And what does it state? The exclusive right of sale listing agreement is between seller and broker. And you can see that they are highlighted in bold, okay? Because they want you to make sure that you understand that the seller's information goes in here and the brokerage information goes down here. You cannot put the team name. You cannot put your name. You have to put the broker. If you're with La Rosa Realty, La Rosa Realty. If you're with La Rosa Realty Kissimmee, La Rosa Realty Kissimmee. Whoever the name of your broker is, that's who you're going to put right here. Now, you can put in parentheses your name, but this contract is between the seller and the broker. Authority to sell property. So basically, it's just giving you authority to sell this property. Gives the exclusive right to sell the real and personal property, collectively property described below at the price and terms described below, beginning when? When is the effective date of this contract? Remember, in the state of Florida and the MLS rules state that once you have this signed, if there's a date here of today, it has to be listed within 24 hours on the MLS. So keep that in mind when putting the date here as when you're going to list this property, because if you're going to list it, if the seller told you, let's list it 5 days from now, you have to make sure that it correlates with whatever your listing agreement says, because you have to put it on the MLS usually within 24 hours of the signed listing agreement or the start date of this listing agreement. And termination date. When does this terminate? Now, we all know homes are taking a little longer to sell. So let's just be nice and kind and at least give 6 months. Okay, especially now with the new NAR changes and everything that's come along that buyers have to pay possibly compensation. So you know that it might take a little longer to sell your listing. So don't do a 2-week listing, a 1-month listing, even a 3-month listing. Try to convince the seller, or at least have the conversation with the seller, that at least 6 months will be needed. Okay. If you can do a year, even better. Upon full execution of this contract for sale and purchase of the property, all rights and obligations of this agreement will automatically extend through the date of the actual closing of the sales contract. What does that mean? So even if your contract, let's say, expires tomorrow, but you close, you're under contract already, you have an offer, and the offer or the closing of that offer doesn't close until after this date where it terminated, it's still covering you here because it's saying it will automatically extend through the date of actual closing of the sales contract. But obviously, you have to have an offer before that execution date or that termination date. Okay. Seller and broker acknowledge that this agreement does not guarantee a sale. This property will be offered to any person without regard of race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin, and any other factor protected by federal, state, and local law. Seller certifies that and represents that he or she is, or it, meaning a corporation, is legally entitled to convey the property and all improvements. Okay. Obviously here we're going to put our street address and we're going to put our legal description, which we've always done. Okay, so street address, legal description, personal property, including appliances. What is basically staying with the seller? This is usually what is staying with the seller, not what's staying in the property. So let's say there's a shed and the seller wants to take the shed when he sells the house, then you would have to put the shed here. Anything that is attached to the house and would normally stay with the buyer, but the seller wants to exclude from the sale would go here, okay? And if there's more than, if there's a long list, you can see attachment and you can put in here, you know, Appendix A, Appendix B, whatever attachment you have attached. Occupancy, property is or is not currently occupied by a tenant. If occupied, the lease term expires when? Of course, again, is it occupied or is it not currently occupied by a tenant? This has nothing to do with the seller. If the seller is occupying, you can just put is not currently occupied by a tenant, okay? Because the seller is living there. If occupied, the lease term expires when? When does the lease expire for that tenant? You have to put that in there. Price and terms. The property is offered for sale on the following terms or on other terms acceptable to seller. Price. You're going to put the price of the property. How much does he want to sell it for? What type of financing is the seller willing to accept? Cash, conventional, VA, FHA, other. You would have to say other here. Let's say he's willing to do a seller financing, right? Then that would be here. Seller will hold purchase money mortgage, and the amount is, and this is again if he's willing to do financing on their own. So most of the times in most scenarios we're going to use either cash, conventional, VA, FHA, all four of them, or again other specify. Assumption of existing mortgage. This does not happen very, very often, but I wanted to kind of go over that. You're probably not going to use this very often. Assumption of existing mortgage is exactly that, which most lenders do not approve. Okay, so that's why it's not really used very often, but you never know. Buyer may assume existing mortgage for, right? That's only if it's an assumable mortgage and the new buyer qualifies for that mortgage. So I would really not concentrate too much on this because this is probably not something that you're going to be using. Okay. Let's see here. Now we go to seller expenses. Seller will pay mortgage discount, other closing costs, or concessions not to exceed this. Now, this is an important conversation to have with your seller if they're wanting to contribute to the closing cost of the buyer. Keep in mind that the closing costs to the buyer also include the buyer's agent compensation. They can use it for that if it's a concession. Okay, so you want to speak to your seller if they're offering any type of concessions to the buyer at the closing. Okay, that could be a flat amount. Actually, it has to be a flat amount because it used to say before percentage or dollar amount. Now they're being very specific as to a dollar amount. So it has to be in a dollar format. Broker obligations. Broker agrees to make diligent and continued efforts to sell the property in accordance with this agreement until the sales contract is pending on the property. This includes except when not in the seller's best interest, cooperating and communicating with other brokers and making the property available for showings. Okay, so basically it's telling the seller again that we will be cooperating or at least communicating with other brokers and making the property available to other brokers and also to have showings. Multiple listing service. This is where a lot of things have changed. Placing the property in a multiple listing service is beneficial to the seller because the property will be exposed to a large number of potential buyers. As a MLS participant, which most of us are, because if not, we wouldn't be doing a listing, broker is obligated to enter the property into the MLS within 1 business day. That's why I wanted to make sure that those dates are clear on your contract. You're supposed to put it in the MLS within 1 business day of marketing the property to the public. Okay, see paragraph 6A. As or as necessary to comply with local MLS rules. This listing will be published accordingly in the MLS unless the seller directs the broker otherwise in writing. So if the seller doesn't want you to put it on the MLS, they have the right not to put it on the MLS. Obviously, that would limit you from being able to market that property to everyone else, but they can have that option. Seller authorizes broker to report to the MLS this listing information and price, terms, and financing information on any resulting sale for use by authorized board association members and MLS participants and subscribers unless seller directs broker otherwise in writing. Remember, when we close out a listing, it'll ask us how much did it sell for, if there was any concessions. It asks us particular questions before we close it out in the MLS. This is just letting the seller know that that is something that we are going to share, public information that we're going to share to be used by the board, but they do have the right not to do that if they put it in writing. So they would have they would have to put it in writing that they don't want us to share that information. Okay. Now, initials, sellers, right? And of course, if you need another seller, there's 3 sellers, 4 sellers, you would add more initials. And broker or authorized associate. So broker or authorized associate. We have not determined right now. More than likely, we will be able to sign this as well. But it would say, and broker right here, and authorized associate acknowledge receipt of a copy of this page, which is page 1 of 5. The parties acknowledge this form should not be used to share offers of compensation to buyer brokers or other buyer representatives via any field in the multiple listing service. This is just going back to disclosing that we will no longer be sharing compensation in the MLS, not whatsoever. So don't try to get creative. Not whatsoever will you share any type of compensation on the MLS, on showing time, anything that has an IDX feed, basically a feed that feeds all the information from the MLS to other platforms. So whatever that platform is, you cannot share compensation on anything that has to do with the MLS or anything that they basically work with in a sense, okay? Broker authority, seller authorizes broker to market the property to the public unless limited in paragraph 6B, which is basically what we just discussed here and here. So public marketing includes, but is not limited to, flyers, yard signs, digital marketing on public-facing websites, brokerage websites, displays, email blasts, multi-brokerage listing sharing networks, and applications available to the general public. So what does this mean? You can still market the property. You can still make flyers. You can still put yard signs. And by the way, you can put commission or compensation that you're offering. If you are offering any compensation on the listing side, you can put that on flyers, signs, digital marketing, anything except anything that's related to the MLS. You can even put it on social media, okay? Public marketing also includes marketing the property to real estate agents outside broker's office. So this is just, again, reiterating that part of your marketing efforts as a listing agent is to market the property to real estate agents outside the broker's office. Place appropriate transaction signs on the property, except if paragraph 6B1 is checked below. Okay, so this is letting you know that if they don't want to sign on the property, that they have to make sure that they check one of these. Okay, so use seller's name in connection with the marketing or advertising of the property. Display the property on the internet except the street address. This is usually done only if it's a special case where maybe it's an FBI agent or a federal government officer or something where they don't want their address listed publicly on the MLS. They would have to make sure that they check that information here so we do not display their physical address, okay? Seller does not authorize broker to display the property on the MLS. Again, they do have that option. So if they don't want it placed on the MLS and they just want you to put a sign on their yard, you know, that's a possibility. Seller understands and acknowledges that if seller checks option 6B for sale sign will not be placed upon the property. And seller understands and acknowledges that if seller checks option 6BI, broker will be limited to marketing the property only to agents within the broker's office, which means if they don't want to put it on the MLS, you can market to your broker's agents. So any agent that's within your brokerage, but you cannot market it outside of that. So that's very key to understand. Okay. And they would have to initial here if that's what they decide. So if they check anything here, they have to initial here. If this is not checked, they do not need to initial here. Okay. Obtain information relating to the present mortgage on the property. Okay, so provide objective comparative market analysis information to potential buyers. These are all the responsibilities of the broker. Check if applicable. Use a lockbox system to show or access the property. A lockbox does not ensure the property's security. Seller is advised to ensure and remove valuables. Seller agrees that the lockbox is for the seller's benefit and releases broker persons working with the broker and broker's local realtor board association from any liability and responsibility in connection with any damage or loss that occurs. So basically, this is just protecting us if you decide to put a lockbox or they're okay with you putting a lockbox. Let's say somebody breaks the lockbox and breaks in, that we are not responsible. Okay. Withhold verbal offers. Is your seller giving you permission to just, I don't want to hear verbal offers. I just want the offers that are in writing. This will just basically give you authorization whether they want you to withhold verbal offers and just give them written offers, or they're okay with receiving verbal and written offers. Okay, so that's a conversation you have to have with your seller. Withhold all offers once seller accepts a sales contract. So again, if the seller already accepted a sales contract and he doesn't want to see any other offers, he would have to check here. Now, if he doesn't check there, then basically that's saying that any offers that come in after they were initially in contract with this particular offer, they're going to want to see them. Okay. I normally say withhold verbal offers and withhold the other offers because if they get an offer for 550 on their house and all of a sudden they're under contract and 6 days later they get another offer that's 600,000, what do you think they're going to do? Right? So just, discuss that with your seller before and have them make that choice. Virtual office websites. Some real estate brokerages offer real estate brokerage services online. These websites are referred to virtual office websites. An automated estimate of market value or reviews and comments about a property may be displayed in conjunction with the property on some VOWs. Anyone who registers on a VOW, okay, which is again is a virtual office website, may gain access to such automated valuations or comments and reviews about any property displayed on the virtual office website, unless limited below. A virtual office website may display automated valuations or comments and reviews about this property. So again, this is just explaining what a virtual office website is, and it's telling the seller, do you authorize for us to go ahead and share all the information regarding this property, or do you not, basically, okay? So again, a discussion to have with your seller. Seller does not authorize an automated estimated market value of the listing, or seller does not authorize third parties to write comments. That's totally up to the seller. Most sellers that I've seen will always check this. And again, when you list it on the MLS, you have to make sure that you listed property on the MLS. Seller obligations in consideration to broker's obligations. This is the seller's obligations to you, okay, or to the broker. Cooperate with the broker in carrying out the purpose of this agreement, including referring immediately to broker all inquiries regarding the property's transfer, whether by purchase or any other means of transfer. Let's say they were in they all of a sudden you're under contract with them and they decide, the brother wants to take over the mortgage, or the brother wants to go ahead and buy the house, they have to share that information with you. Okay. They cannot just sell the house from under you without letting you know, or letting the broker know. Recognized broker may be subject to additional MLS obligations and potential penalties for failure to comply with them. Provide broker with keys to property and make the property available for the broker to show during reasonable times. Inform broker before leasing, mortgaging, and otherwise encumbering the property. So if they decide they've moved out, the house hasn't sold, they decided to rent the property, they have to let you know. okay, or they're in violation of the contract. Indemnify broker and hold broker harmless from losses, damages, costs, and expenses of any nature, including attorney fees, and from liability to any person that broker incurs because of seller's negligence, representations, misrepresentations, actions, or inactions, the use of a lockbox, the existence of undisclosed material facts about the property. This clause will survive broker's performance and transfer of title. So this is just a protection for us, okay? Perform any act reasonably necessary to comply with FERPTA. Again, if the agent, I mean, the seller is a foreign national, they have to comply with FERPTA. So it's just telling you that we will perform any act reasonably necessary to comply with FERPTA. Okay. Make all legally required disclosures, including all facts that materially affect the property's value and are not readily observable to known by the buyer. So this is just the seller making sure that they understand that they have a responsibility to share with us if there's anything or material effect of the property, anything in the property that they need to disclose to us that maybe we didn't see, okay, or the buyer saw. Seller certifies and represents that seller knows of no such material facts, local government building code violations, unservable defects, etc., other than the following. So again, they would have to list here if they know that the roof is leaking, if they know that they have a code violation, if they know that they have an open permit, if they know anything that they know regarding the property that we would have to disclose, they need to make sure that they disclose it here. Seller will immediately inform broker of any material facts that arise after signing this agreement. So again, he signed the agreement today and tomorrow there's a hurricane and the roof blows off. He needs to let us know that the roof flew off, right? Consult appropriate professionals for related legal, tax, property condition, environmental, foreign reporting requirements, and other specialized advice. Again, letting the seller know they have to consult the appropriate professionals for related legal, tax, property condition. These are all things that we are not allowed to discuss with the seller because we are not attorneys, we're not tax attorneys, we're not tax preparers, we're not property, we're not, contractors, we're not involved with environmental, we don't have any foreign reporting requirements that, that's all legal stuff and stuff that needs to be consulted with someone else, not us. Again, seller, broker, seller's associate. Okay, this is where it comes to the fun part, okay, on this page. Number 8, compensation. Seller will compensate broker as specified below if a buyer is procured who is ready, willing, and able to purchase the property or any interest in the property on the terms of this agreement or any other terms acceptable to seller. Seller will pay the broker as follows. So this kind of almost stays the same. It's going to say exactly, like we used to have it, what percentage that you are charging for your compensation for your professional services, plus any additional fees and or a flat fee, whichever you guys agree upon, right? Because it's all negotiable and it's all dependent on what the seller and the agent basically come to, or the broker comes to, okay? I see a lot of agents that leave these two spots blank, and I'm going to recommend that you don't leave them blank. You always want to put some sort of compensation here, because what if the seller decides in the middle that he does not want to, he doesn't want to, he decided not to sell it. Maybe he's going to do a consideration or an option to lease, or, an option to buy, or a lease with option to buy, or anything of that nature. And you've done all this work, and now he decided to change his mind and do something totally different. You want to make sure that you are compensated for the time that you spent on this transaction and on this deal, right? Because sellers can change their mind, especially if somebody comes in and says, oh, their cousin comes in, oh, primo, cousin, I want to, if you can just maybe lease the house and give me the option to buy in 2 years, I'll give you a $30,000 down payment, and, we can do a lease to own type of transaction, right? So, if that happens, if you don't put any compensation here, guess what? You're not getting paid for if he decides to change his mind. So put a compensation here. Normally I put 10%, but again, it's totally up to you guys. You know how much, you're worth. And then here, the same thing. If they decide, how many times haven't we had a seller, they couldn't sell their house, or maybe they, it got kind of tight and they're like, let's go ahead and just lease the house. I decided to just rent the house. I don't want to sell it. Right after we did all the work, we did all the open houses, we did all the marketing. and now they want to lease it, right? Put 10% here, you know, or something. I'm not saying put 10%. I put 10%, but you can put whatever you want of gross lease value as a leasing fee. So basically, if they decide to rent it to their cousin or their sister, you're still owed compensation for whatever that lease amount is for the year. So you want to put something in these two spaces. Don't leave it blank. All right, broker's fee is due on the following circumstances. If any interest of the property is transferred, again, transferred, if they transfer the property to someone else, whatever they do, this is basically protecting you. Broker's fee is due in the following circumstances. If any interest in the property is transferred, whether by sale, lease, exchange, governmental action, bankruptcy, or any other means of transfer, regardless of whether the buyer is secured by seller, broker, or any other persons. If seller refuses or fails to sign an offer at the price and terms stated in this agreement, they default on an executed sales contract or default on an executed contract or agrees with a buyer to cancel an executed sales contract if within termination date. You always want to put a termination date, which is your protection period. Put 90 days, 120. Don't put 15 days, 10 days. Give yourself some time because sometimes things happen, you know, and it takes a little while and you want to make sure that your compensation is secure. Okay. So put in here at least 90 days, in my opinion. Again, it's totally up to you, but in my opinion, I would put at least 90 days after termination, which is your protection period. Seller transfers or contracts to transfer the property or any interest of the property to any prospects with whom seller or broker or any real estate licensee communicated regarding the property before the termination date. However, no fee will be due to broker if the property is relisted after the termination date and sold through another broker. So this is very key here, right? So if you have a listing, they decide to, you know, your listing terminated, it expired, or maybe they again defaulted, or he transferred the contract to someone else, or the interest of the property to someone else. But, you know, or maybe he sold it to a buyer that came and you know, that came while you were under contract, and then the buyer went behind your back to the seller and or to the directly to the seller, and they closed on that property, that you are still owed some compensation for that. You can still go after the seller for your compensation. But if it's saying that if it expires, let's say, or the contract terminates, right? So the property before the termination date. However, no fee will be due to broker if the property is relisted after the termination date and sold through another broker. So basically it's telling you that if it's relisted, keyword here, relisted after the termination date. So the contract terminated and they decided to relist the property with another agent, right? So they relist it after the termination date and they sell it through another broker. We cannot collect anything, okay? But if they decide that they're going to transfer the property, you know, before the termination date or through your protection period, and they didn't relist it, they didn't put it on the market. Let's say that buyer comes behind your back and goes directly to the seller, and the seller, you know, on the side decide, you know what, I'm going to cancel my contract, or, you know, whatever it is, I'm just going to cancel the contract and go ahead and sell you the house so I don't have to pay my agent. Then at that point you would be due some compensation, right? Because it was through that protection period that you had on the contract, okay? And it was not relisted, okay? Retained deposits. As consideration for broker services, broker is entitled to receive blank of all deposits that seller retains as liquidated damages for buyer's default in the transaction, not to exceed the paragraph 8E. Retained deposits, that's consideration for broker services, broker is entitled to receive. Here you would put a percentage, okay? It used to say or 50% if this was left blank. But right now it's telling you that if you don't put anything in there, the broker is not entitled to anything, any deposit. So this is talking about escrow. So if the seller and has the contract, there's an as-is contract, so you guys are under contract, the buyer backs out for some reason or other, and the escrow is going back to the seller, right? So now the escrow is going to the seller. This is saying, okay, let's say the escrow was $10,000. That means that 5,000 or whatever you put in here, whatever percentage you put in here, because again, that's negotiable. Whatever percent you put in here will come back to the broker. So if the seller wins a case because the buyer defaulted and now the seller is entitled to that escrow, whatever that escrow is, if it's $10,000, you can put in there whatever percentage the broker is requiring for that from that $10,000 because you did all the work, right? You went through the contract, you did everything you needed to do. You showed up for inspection, you showed up for appraisal, you did all your work, your due diligence, but then all of a sudden the contract falls apart and the seller is at fault. So I mean the buyer is at fault. So now the escrow goes to the seller. The seller is to share that with the broker for their time and effort. So you have to put a percentage here. I would put 50%. Again, that's my personal. You choose whatever you want to choose, but don't leave it blank. Okay. All right. Broker commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Again, this is just telling them broker commissions are not set by law and they're fully negotiable. Notice to seller regarding buyer's broker. The buyer's broker, even if compensated by seller or broker, will provide services for the buyer. Okay. Notice to seller regarding buyer brokers. The buyer's broker, even if compensated by seller or by the broker, will provide services for the buyer. Seller is advised and is aware that seller may, but is not required to compensate a buyer's broker upon closing. Sellers may choose to enter into a separate written agreement to pay buyer's broker or may approve broker to pay buyer's broker in accordance with the paragraph 10. Seller also understands that buyer's brokers may include this broker if broker is also works with the buyer on this transaction. Okay. This is a little confusing to me, but let's read that again. Buyer's broker, all right? So the buyer's broker may include this brokerage, which is being the listing brokerage, if broker also works with the buyer on this transaction. So this is if you're basically representing both. If this occurs during the duration of this listing, broker will be entitled to the compensation in paragraph 8. Okay, so we're going to go back to 8. What did we put on 8? What was the compensation here? That's what they're entitled to, right? So in paragraph 8, for services performed for seller. So whatever the seller agreed to pay you, you still get paid, right? As well as the buyer's broker compensation in paragraph 10A for services rendered for buyer. The seller should therefore take this into consideration when negotiating compensation, and broker, listing broker, may receive separate compensation from buyer for services rendered to buyer by broker. So this is just disclosing that you can represent both parties. You can represent the seller and you can represent the buyer, and you can charge the buyer compensation and you can charge the seller compensation. Okay, which is great because it's disclosing that we can charge the buyer and the seller for our services. Okay. All right, let's go back to the nitty gritty here. Compensation to buyer's broker, brokerage commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Seller approves the following, check all that apply. If no option is checked, then option C is deemed to be selected. So they have to choose one or else it's going to be automatic C, no compensation will be offered to buyer's broker. So these are the new options. Before it used to just say seller authorizes broker to offer compensation to buyer's broker in the amount of XYZ of the purchase price or a flat fee. This amount will be paid from broker to broker. So basically the same way we were doing it the old way, where we got paid a certain compensation and we cooperated with the buyer's broker from that compensation, right? To buyer's broker from the compensation amount agreed to in paragraph 8. Again, the compensation that you agreed to in your listing agreement. This amount will be paid from broker to broker from the compensation amount agreed in the paragraph 8. Sorry, I just repeated that. This compensation will be set forth in a separate written agreement. That's where those compensation forms come in. You cannot have a listing agreement and a buyer's agreement without having a compensation agreement in place. We'll go over that in another video, but make sure that you have a compensation agreement. This compensation will be set forth in a separate, again, this compensation will be set forth in a separate written agreement between broker and buyer's broker. So between listing broker and the buyer's broker. That's if you're cooperating, okay? The other option has seller authorizes broker to offer compensation to buyer's broker from the seller. The seller may elect to say, Teresa, I want to pay you 4% to list my house, but I'm willing to pay 1% to a buyer's broker, right? They can elect to do that. So that's where this would come in. Seller authorizes broker to offer compensation to buyer's broker from the seller, not from the compensation they agreed to pay you, in the amount of XYZ or purchase of the purchase price or a flat fee. This compensation will be set forth in a separate written agreement between the seller and buyer's broker. Again, those compensation forms are still going to need to be signed, guaranteeing that either the broker is going to pay or the seller is going to pay, okay? And then the other option is no compensation will be offered to buyer's broker. Now, this is, again, my personal opinion, my professional opinion, totally up to you. You're an independent contractor. Those are things that you have to discuss with your broker and figure out what your broker would prefer for you to do, okay? Not that they're going to dictate that this is how much it's going to be, but for them to let you know what they prefer it should be, okay? No compensation will be offered to buyer's broker. But what do you think that's going to happen with no compensation is offered to buyer's broker, right? It's either, and they're not authorizing you to share your compensation. They're not authorizing to use that 4% they're paying you or 5% they're paying or 6% they're paying you or 8% or 10% that they're paying you for you to be able to cooperate. If they don't choose this, then you can't cooperate. Period. Or they decide that they don't want to give compensation to the buyer's broker, right? So if they do this, that means that the buyers are going to have to pay compensation to their buyer's broker and or negotiate concessions, or, because everything's negotiable. You can, the buyer's agent can go back to the listing agent and say, is the seller willing to pay concessions, Don't say to the buyer's agent or to the listing agent, hey, is your seller willing to pay concessions to help pay for my buyer's fees? Don't say that. Use concessions for, hey, just say concessions. Is your seller offering any concessions to help with closing costs? You don't have to say for what the closing costs are, just for closing costs, because our compensation as a buyer's agent is closing costs. It's part of the closing cost in a sense. So then you don't have to be specific, because again, you're going back to giving more disclosures and doing all this other stuff. So just find out if they're giving concessions, if they're not compensating with the buyer's broker. Are they at least willing to give concessions? Okay. So this is interesting. This is very interesting, and I'm not going to get into why I think it's interesting, but this is definitely, I'm thinking that this will probably, and again, my personal opinion, that it's probably going to be changed at one point or another and reworded one more time. Okay. All right, brokerage relationship. Broker will act as a transaction broker, which we are here in the state of Florida for the most part, transaction brokers, and we're definitely transaction brokers in Rosa Realty. Broker will deal honestly and fairly, will account for all funds, will use skill, care, and diligence in the transaction, will disclose all known facts and material fact that value of the residential property, which are not readily observable to the buyer, will present all offers and counter offers, will present all offers. Keep that in mind, listing agents. Will present all offers, even if they look ridiculous, and counter offers in a timely manner unless directed otherwise in writing, and will have limited confidentiality. Seller unless waived in writing, okay? Unless seller tells you, don't show me any offers that are less than $500,000. I'm not taking any offers that are less than $500,000. Then at that point, you have to get that in writing somewhere, right? That the seller indicated to you not to share any offers under $500,000, right? Just need to get it in writing. Conditional termination. At seller's request, broker may agree to conditionally terminate this agreement. If broker agrees to conditionally terminate, seller must sign a withdrawal agreement, reimburse broker for all direct expenses incurred in marketing the property, and pay a cancellation fee of XYZ. Now, some agents, listing agents, do not like to charge a termination fee if the seller decides to terminate their agreement with them. I personally, again, would charge a termination cancellation fee. Why? Because you put in work. Let's say you've had this listing for 3 months. You've done 9 open houses. You've done a bunch of flyers. You went door knocking. You spend money on marketing material. You took professional photography. You did all these things, right? And then they decide to terminate the contract. I don't know about you, but I want to get paid for what I spent. And even though it says that broker, that they will reimburse broker for all direct expenses incurred in marketing the property and pay a cancellation fee of, I still want to put a cancellation fee because most sellers don't even read this part, right? So put a cancellation fee in here because if you, again, my personal opinion, if I have a contract with someone and there's a cancellation fee, right? I'm going to think twice before I cancel the fee if I know that I'm going to have to pay somebody for canceling that contract, unless I absolutely have to cancel that contract and I have to bite the bullet and pay the fee. But if there's a fee here, I'm going to think twice before I cancel my contract. If there's zero fee here, oh, I'm just going to cancel the contract because Teresa's not going to charge me anything. I'm just going to cancel the contract. And now you spent all this money, all this time, all this effort, all these open houses, and you didn't get paid not one penny. So my personal opinion, put a cancellation fee, okay? And explain why. Plus applicable to sales tax. Broker may void the conditional termination. Broker may void the conditional termination and seller will pay the fee stated in paragraph 8A, less the cancellation fee if seller transfers or contracts to transfer the property or any interest in the property during the time period from the date of conditional termination to termination date and protection period if applicable. Let's read that again. Broker may void the conditional termination. Okay, this is the conditional termination. They may void this conditional termination and seller will pay the fee stated in paragraph 8. Whatever percentage they put here, the seller will pay that plus 8, less the cancellation fee. So they will pay that minus whatever the cancellation fee here that they decided to void, right? So if you put $3,000 cancellation fee here and the broker decides to void the cancellation, but now you're going to have to pay because you decided to transfer the property or any interest in the property during the time period of the date of conditional termination or termination date and protection period. If they decide to do anything within the dates of the contract, they can void the conditional termination and waive that $3,000 fee, but they're going to have to pay whatever they agreed to in the listing agreement minus the $3,000 fee. Okay, so that gets a little interesting. Dispute resolution. This agreement will be construed under Florida law. All controversies, claims, and other matters in question between the parties arising out of or relating to this agreement or the breach thereof will be settled by first attempting mediation under the rules of the American Arbitration Association or other mediator agreed upon by parties. If litigation arises out of this agreement, the prevailing party will be entitled to recover reasonable attorney fees and costs unless the parties agree that disputes will be settled by arbitration as follows. So this has not been decided by the broker or at least La Rosa Realty yet, whether they're going to want you to go to arbitration. Everything goes through mediation first. Mediation, as we all know, is I'm going to sit down with the other party and we're going to talk about it, or the brokers are going to sit down with them. They're going to talk about it, or the seller and the broker are going to talk about it. They're going to come to a mutual agreement and settle it. Done. But if in mediation nothing is settled and nobody is in agreement, then it has to go to arbitration. We do not know if our broker is going to be willing to go to arbitration. So if they're not, we are going to know shortly, then you do not have to sign this, or you do not have to initial this, because it's basically saying that we are not going to go to arbitration. We're going to attempt mediation, but if nothing happens in mediation, we refuse to go to arbitration. Why? Because arbitration can probably cost more to you and the broker than the actual compensation that you were to receive, right? Because by the time they hire attorneys, they take the time to do this whole thing and go to arbitration. It could cost $5, $10, $15,000, $20,000 in attorney fees, and maybe your compensation was only $6,000. So, we're always going to try to do mediation. Again, this has not been decided on. It will be in the new policies that will be released soon, but just don't have for right now. We do not have the seller sign this, okay, or initial that. Miscellaneous. This agreement is binding on sellers and brokers, heirs, personal representatives, administrators, successors, and assigns broker may assign this agreement to another listing office. This agreement is in the entire agreement between. So what it says, broker may assign this agreement to another listing office, is if you have a listing agreement and with a broker, and the broker is okay at releasing that listing to another brokerage because you're either moving brokerages or something, and they're okay with releasing and not just basically okay with the releasing it, they can release the listing agreement to another office. Okay. This agreement is in the entire agreement between seller and broker. No prior or present agreements or representations will be binding on seller or broker unless included in this agreement. Electronic signatures are acceptable and will be binding. Signatures, initials, and modifications communicated by facsimile, fax, which is not even used any days, will be considered as originals. The term buyer is used in this agreement includes buyers, tenants, exchangers, optionees, and other categories of potential or actual transferees. Okay. Additional terms. There's always additional terms to a listing agreement if you want to put in there, like seller does not want to show after 5, whatever additional terms and agreements that you come upon, make sure that you list them here. Okay. Again, everybody signs, signatures, all this information. Make sure you always return a copy to the seller. Put the date you return the copy to the seller, and did you send it through email, fax, mail? I don't know why they put mail. Nobody mails anything anymore, but hey, if they're out of town, maybe you mailed it. Mail or personal delivery. You have to put a date and or what type of method you use to deliver this contract to, because if you don't, and there's some sort of lawsuit, they're going to go to this to make sure that you delivered a copy to the seller, because the seller could say, I never received the contract. I never received a copy of that contract after I signed it, right? After all parties, after it was completely executed. So make sure that you put a date here and how you actually send that copy of this listing agreement to the seller. Okay. All right. I hope this helps. I know that's a lot of information. I hope I went deep enough so that you guys understand how to fill out this document, but keep in mind, everything's negotiable, but just, if you have any questions, you know where to reach me. You can connect with me here, obviously. And if you have any questions, whether you're with La Rosa or another brokerage, it doesn't matter to me. I'm very open to helping agents. So if you have any questions, again, this is not legal advice. This is not a advice that, this is exactly how to fill out this contract or how you should fill it out. Again, I gave a lot of my personal opinions. This is for training purposes only, like I listed on the disclosure. So just understand that, again, talk to your broker, whoever your current broker is, and make sure that everybody's on the same page. And I hope to see you on our next coaching video on these forms. And don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and follow my YouTube channel so that you can, get all the latest trainings that I offer here. Thank you so much and have an amazing day.